Son disappears on way to school in 1979. Suspect admitted, but police release him without evidence. I still remember the way the screen door creaked shut that morning. It was May 25th, 1979. New York City was already thick with the kind of heat that stuck to your neck and reminded you summer was waiting just around the corner. My son Ethan had just turned 6. He was wearing his navy windbreaker with the 2 long sleeves and had a dollar bill folded carefully in his front pocket. He said he wanted to buy a grape soda from Mr. Kamal's corner shop before the bus arrived. It was his first time walking alone to the school bus stop. 2 blocks, that's all. 2 short blocks from our apartment on Prince Street to the corner of West Broadway and Green. You could see the corner from our stoop if you leaned far enough, which I did standing in my nightgown, with my coffee cooling in my hands, pretending not to worry. Pretending this was just another step toward growing up. He turned around once before the corner and waved at me. Big smile lunchbox swinging from his hand. That was the last time I saw my son. We didn't realize anything was wrong until 3:10 p.m. when the school secretary called, asking why Ethan hadn't been in class. My husband Stan and I stared at each other for a long, frozen second, each of us trying to fill in the gap our minds refused to acknowledge. Maybe he got sick. Maybe he went home with a friend. Maybe, but no maybe made sense. Not for Ethan. Within 30 minutes, the apartment was swarming with officers. NYPD detectives in short sleeves and cigarette breath asked if Ethan had ever run away before he hadn't, if we were having marital problems we weren't, if there was any reason someone would want to hurt us we didn't think so. A detective named Bill Butler sat down on the edge of Ethan's twin bed and studied the pictures on the wall. "Happy kid," he said. I nodded, but my throat had closed up. The sun went down without a trace of him. By midnight, they had turned our living room into a command center. Maps, Polaroids, checklists. They combed the neighborhood. Officers knocked on doors all down Green Street. They questioned the man at the corner deli, the crossing guard, the school bus driver. Ethan had never arrived at the stop. No one remembered seeing him. It was like he had vanished into the sidewalk. Stan, always the composed one, paced for hours. He kept going to the window, as if expecting Ethan to walk back in, dragging his lunchbox behind him, sheepish for having caused a fuss. I found myself washing Ethan's breakfast dishes over and over, though they were already clean. The ceramic dinosaur mug he liked, his orange spoon. By 4 a.m., it became real. He was gone. The next morning, his picture was on the front page of the Daily News. Stan, being a professional photographer, had dozens of shots of Ethan. We picked one where his blue eyes were squinting slightly, and his hair was falling into his face, half laughing at something off camera. It made people stop and stare. That photo became a symbol not just for Ethan, but for every child who had gone missing and never come home. Over the next week, tips came in from everywhere. A woman in Queens claimed she saw him at a gas station. A man in Brooklyn said a blonde boy, matching the description, was riding the G train alone. None of it checked out. The leads piled up like smoke, just enough to choke you with hope, but not enough to hold on to. Some nights we still left the porch light on. The case broke the city's heart. It was the first time many New Yorkers realized that children could disappear in broad daylight without anyone seeing a thing. Parents clutched their children tighter. The sidewalks felt less safe. Reporters called our phone so often we had to unplug it. Still, we never stopped answering. Maybe one of them would be the one to bring him back. Detective Butler told us one night around his 3rd cup of coffee that the thing about child disappearances is the first 48 hours matter most. After that, your odds plummet. But he kept coming, kept digging. "There's something off about this," he said once, looking at Ethan's school photo like it held a secret. This kid didn't just wander off. Someone saw something. He worked the case so hard it consumed him. Years later, after he retired, we found out he had taken his own life. His widow told us he never stopped thinking about Ethan. By 1983, Ethan's name was on every milk carton in America. Congress created the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. and Ethan was their first case. His face, the same photo Stan took, became part of American memory, a symbol of innocence lost. I would get letters from strangers, mothers, veterans, even school teachers from as far as Utah. They all said the same thing. We haven't forgotten him, but memory is not the same as justice, and justice wasn't coming. We tried everything. Hired private investigators, talked to psychics, yes, even them. One claimed he was in Mexico. Another said he'd been taken by a cult. Every time the phone rang, I braced myself. And every time it was a false alarm, or worse, silence. Then came 1985. A name started floating around the squad room, Jose Ramos, a drifter, pedophile, known to have preyed on young boys in Washington Square Park. And most chilling of all, he had dated the woman who used to walk Ethan to school during the bus strike just weeks before he vanished. That was the first time I felt real fear, not the slow, creeping dread that had become part of daily life, but a sharp, needle-like terror that this man had known my son, that maybe Ethan hadn't vanished after all. Maybe he had been taken, tricked, lured. The detectives brought Ramos in. He admitted to being 90% sure he had met a boy that looked like Ethan. He described his hair, his voice, even his backpack, but he insisted he let the boy go. The police pressed harder, but there were no witnesses, no physical evidence, no confession, just a maybe. Years passed. Ramos went to jail for another crime, a different boy, a different state, but never for Ethan. That wound remained open festering, and still in our apartment on Prince Street, Ethan's room stayed untouched, his bed made, his dinosaur mug in the sink. I couldn't pack it away, not yet, maybe not ever, because as long as it stayed, so did the hope. By the mid-90s, we had lived half a life without our son. Stan went gray faster than most men I knew. His photography shifted, he stopped doing weddings, and portraits started capturing abandoned buildings, empty park benches, lone swings on rusted chains. I think he was trying to make sense of silence through the lens. I, on the other hand, kept my routines tight. Breakfast at 7:30, mail at 9, laundry on Tuesdays, a rhythm to fill the void. Every year on Ethan's birthday, we baked his favorite cake vanilla with lemon frosting and placed it next to his photo. A ritual, a prayer, not just for Ethan, but for ourselves. Then in 1998, a new name appeared in the file, Phil Mahoney, a detective who had recently transferred to the Missing Persons Division. He told us he'd read a poem about a missing boy taped to a lamppost. Ethan's poster was mentioned in the final line. I couldn't stop thinking about him, he said when he visited our home. I asked to be reassigned to your case. It was hard to believe in miracles anymore, but something in Mahoney's eyes said he wasn't going through the motions. He had that fire we hadn't seen in years, the same fire Detective Butler once had. Mahoney did what few others had tried. He started from scratch. He reopened old boxes, reread every interview, rewalked the route Ethan would have taken that day. Something's off, he said, echoing Butler. Too quiet, too fast. Someone knew that boy. He focused in again on Ramos. Jose Ramos was still in a Pennsylvania prison serving time for abusing another child. Mahoney flew out and interviewed him. What he got was familiar evasion fragments, half admissions. Ramos again said he was pretty sure the boy he met on May 25, 1979, was Ethan. He described the corner of Washington Square Park, the soda, even the dollar in Ethan's hand. But there was still no proof, just words. And in court that wasn't enough. By 2000, our patience and grief had crystallized into something harder purpose. That's when our attorney Brian O'Dwyer approached us with an idea, something we had never considered. You could file a civil suit against Ramos, he said. Wrongful death. It won't bring Ethan back, but it might bring answers, or at the very least closure. Stan was hesitant. Me too. It meant something profound, something final. We'd have to declare our son dead. On June 19, 2001, we stood in Manhattan Surrogate's court, and told the judge that we no longer believed our son would be found alive. There were no cameras, no headlines, just a quiet declaration that our hope had become history. When the ruling came through, legally declaring Ethan deceased, I held Stan's hand and felt my knees go weak. The press framed it as closure, but closure is something people without loss like to talk about. For us, it was an act of surrender. We filed the civil case against Jose Ramos later that year. He refused to testify, never admitted guilt under oath, but we pressed on, and in 2004 we won. The court ruled that Jose Ramos was responsible for the wrongful death of our son. It was a symbolic victory. No handcuffs, no sentencing, no public admission. But for us it was a line in the sand. Stan took the judgment and mailed it to Ramos twice a year, on Ethan's birthday, and on the anniversary of his disappearance. He'd write the same message on the back of the envelope every time. "What did you do to my little boy?" And then, for a while, the world moved on. But we didn't. We never left the apartment, never took down Ethan's photos, never stopped attending missing children vigils. Other families looked to us like weathered lighthouses in a storm. We knew their pain. We shared it. Some even found their children again, runaways, reunions, DNA breakthroughs. We were happy for them, genuinely, but every smile carried a pinch of salt. Ethan remained in the shadows, a ghost at our dinner table, a face in a crowd that wasn't there. In 2010, a new district attorney, Cyrus Vance Jr., took office. One of the first letters he received was from Stan. It was short, just 4 sentences. It ended with, "Please don't let my son be forgotten." To our surprise, Vance called. He wanted to reopen the case. Within weeks, a fresh team of NYPD detectives and prosecutors began combing through the files. Leading the effort was Lieutenant Chris Zimmerman, a meticulous, quiet man with a detective's instinct for patterns and a father's instinct for justice. They reviewed Ramos again, but reached the same legal wall. No new evidence, no breakthrough. Zimmerman began pulling on loose threads, and that's when something odd happened. In 2012, more than 30 years after Ethan vanished, investigators dug up the basement of a small building near our neighborhood, one that used to house a handyman's workshop. The man had worked for our building in the late 70s, just blocks from where Ethan disappeared. News crews swarmed the scene, rumors flew, reporters camped outside, but after days of digging bones, hair samples, soil tests, there was nothing. Another dead end. Or so we thought. Then came the phone call. An informant in New Jersey claimed his brother-in-law had confessed to doing something horrible to a child in New York years ago. The man's name was Pedro Hernandez. We had never heard it before. He had worked as a stock boy in the bodega on the very corner where Ethan was supposed to board the bus. He was 18 back then, quiet, socially awkward, religious. The store had changed hands multiple times since 1979. And somehow Hernandez had slipped under the radar for decades. According to the tipster, Hernandez had told members of a church group, and even his ex-wife, that he had harmed a little boy. The stories were vague, conflicted, but they were there, and they were chilling. The detectives moved fast. In May 2012, they knocked on Hernandez's door in Mapleshade, New Jersey. When he answered, they asked if he'd be willing to talk about a missing persons case. According to their report, the color drained from his face. He didn't ask which case, he just nodded. 2 days later, Hernandez walked into the Camden prosecutor's office. No lawyer, no hesitation. He sat down across from 2 detectives and confessed. No threats, no prompting. "I saw the boy waiting for the bus," he said. "I offered him a soda. Told him to come to the basement. He said he choked Ethan, that he put him in a box, that he left the box out with the trash. 33 years. And now one man was saying he did it. No lawyer, no deal, just a name, Ethan's name." When Pedro Hernandez confessed, the room went quiet, not just in the Camden prosecutor's office, but across the NYPD and DA's office in Manhattan. The news swept in like a cold wind. A man who had never been seriously investigated, never even named publicly, now claimed responsibility for one of America's longest unsolved child disappearances. But it wasn't that simple. It never is. Hernandez's confession was unsettling, not because of what he said, but how he said it. His voice was flat, almost dreamlike. He offered details, but hesitated with names. When shown Ethan's missing poster, he looked down and whispered, "That's him." Still, what haunted the detectives most wasn't what Hernandez said on camera, it was what happened before the camera ever rolled. For nearly 6 hours, Pedro Hernandez spoke freely to officers without being recorded. He had no lawyer, no deal on the table, no clear motive for confessing after 33 years. When the camera was finally turned on, he calmly repeated his story. But doubts were already creeping in. Zimmerman's team walked him back to the site, now a different storefront, where the old basement had been. Hernandez led them there without hesitation, pointed to where the entrance had once been. The kicker. The doorway he remembered didn't exist anymore. Records confirmed it had been sealed in the early 1980s, meaning Hernandez had somehow recalled a layout that hadn't existed for decades. That detail struck the DA's office hard. "That's not something you get from the newspapers," one investigator said. "That's something only someone who'd been there would know." Still, the confession alone wasn't enough. Hernandez was arrested and booked. The story hit national headlines. After 33 years, a man had confessed to killing Ethan Patz. Our phones rang nonstop. The media stood outside our building for days. Some neighbors cried. Others questioned everything, and so did we. Stan sat in silence for a long time that night. When I finally asked what he thought, he only said one thing: "I don't know if he did it, but I know he knows something." The public reaction was split. Some cried justice at last. Others feared a vulnerable man had been manipulated. After all, Pedro Hernandez had no criminal record, no history of violence. He was soft-spoken, religious, reportedly shy. He had told his church group years ago that he'd done something bad in New York, but no one had reported it. In court, his attorneys painted a portrait of a man mentally unwell, diagnosed with schizotypal personality disorder, prone to hallucinations, a low IQ, susceptible to suggestion. He doesn't know what's real, his defense said. He believes he did it, but belief isn't proof. Meanwhile, the DA's office pushed forward. They believed Hernandez wasn't just some confused man looking for penance. They saw a pattern. Multiple people, including his ex-wife and a childhood friend, said he'd confessed years earlier. Quiet, guilt-ridden confessions, never attention-seeking, never public. Just the same haunting line, "I heard a boy in New York." Then came a critical piece of evidence-building records. When Hernandez said he left Ethan's body near a stairwell that no longer existed, prosecutors were skeptical. But old construction records confirmed his memory. That door had been bricked over in 1982, 3 years after Ethan vanished. It was the first truly objective proof that he'd once known that basement well. Was it enough? The first trial began in 2015. We sat in the back of the courtroom. Stan never once took his eyes off Hernandez. I couldn't look at him. I stared at the floor and gripped Ethan's picture in my hand until my knuckles turned white. The defense strategy was clear: raise doubt. No physical evidence, no eyewitnesses, no Ethan. Just a confession from a man with documented mental illness and a long history of psychological problems. They grilled investigators on the missing 6 hours of interrogation. Why wasn't it taped? What exactly had they said to Hernandez before the camera rolled? How do you know? The defense asked that this wasn't fed to him, coached. And they had a point. Even I, sitting in that courtroom, wondered, but the prosecution came prepared. They called in every person Hernandez had confessed to over the years: churchgoers, family, friends. None had come forward back then, not because they were hiding something, but because they didn't believe him, or didn't want to. They played the recording of his confession, simple, uneasy, but not frantic. When I choked him, he had said he just went soft. That line, I'll never forget that line. After 3 months, the jury deliberated. Days turned into weeks. On the 18th day, they reported a deadlock, mistrial, 11 guilty, 1 holdout. We were devastated, but we weren't done. The Manhattan DA immediately announced plans to retry the case, and we were ready to sit through it all again. A second trial began in 2017. It was just as long, just as emotional, the same evidence, the same debate, but this time the jury didn't break. On the 9th day of deliberation, they came back with a verdict. Guilty. When the word was spoken aloud, Stan exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 38 years. I cried not because I thought we'd found peace, but because we'd found something that might hold in court. A sentence, a name. Pedro Hernandez was sentenced to 25 years to life. Justice maybe, but justice doesn't kiss your forehead goodnight. Justice doesn't leave a pair of sneakers by the door or draw crayon dinosaurs on the wall. Justice is what you cling to when all else has failed. After the verdict, we stepped outside into the crisp morning air, and for a moment, just a moment, I imagined I could hear Ethan's laughter echoing between the buildings. But it wasn't peace we walked into. It was the complicated aftermath of a decades-old case, stitched together by memories, suspicion, and absence. The press surrounded us, microphones, reaching like hands into our grief. Stan answered no questions. I didn't trust my voice to speak. Inside, Pedro Hernandez sat, still quiet, hands folded like a man at Sunday service. Not defiant, not relieved, just empty. That haunted me more than any courtroom testimony. We had justice now, but not the truth, not the whole truth, because somewhere buried beneath the flash of cameras and the rustle of papers was a photograph. Not the one on the missing poster, not the school picture on our mantle. No, this was different. Faded, overexposed, curled at the corners. It was handed to us by a retired cop who'd worked the case in '79. He said he found it in a folder no one opened in years. It showed Ethan standing by a swing set, but what struck me wasn't his smile. It was the boy next to him. We didn't know his name. He wasn't from our neighborhood. The photo had no date, just Ethan and a slightly older boy with a mop of black hair looking straight into the lens, expression blank. I showed it to Stan. He went pale. "That's not Ramos," he said quietly, "and it's definitely not Hernandez. So who was he?" We took it to the detectives. They logged it, added it to the evidence archive, promised to scan old yearbooks, run face recognition check against databases. But I could feel it. This wasn't a lead they'd chase hard. Not now. Not after the trial. To them, the case was closed. But not for us. That winter, I started going through Ethan's old things again. Not out of nostalgia. I was searching, hoping to find that photo somewhere in our own albums to confirm the context, the moment. But it never turned up. And every time I looked at it, something gnawed at me. The boy next to Ethan wasn't posing. He wasn't smiling. He looked like he knew something, like he didn't want to be in the photo at all. Then one night it hit me. That swing set wasn't from any New York park. It was from our backyard. I recognized the rust stain on the frame, which meant that boy had been at our home, and we had no idea who he was. After discovering the swing set in the photograph was our own, something inside me shifted. The old ache of loss sharpened into something else, urgency. A mother's instinct doesn't forget no matter how many years pass. I took the photo to Stan again. This time he didn't just glance. He studied it, his brow furrowing, breath catching in his throat. "Jesus," he whispered. "That kid. I think I've seen him before." We spent the next few days pulling out every photo album, every box of Ethan's childhood mementos. School event flyers, birthday invitations, guest lists from a different time. Most of the names were familiar neighbors, schoolmates, cousins from Connecticut. But there was one scribbled name half erased on the back of a torn RSVP card. Danny Susan's nephew Stan tapped it. "Susan Harrington," he said slowly. "Didn't she help walk Ethan to school during the bus strike?" I nodded. She babysat for a while. That spring, I remembered Susan quiet chain-smoking always, with a paperback in hand. Lived 2 buildings down. I hadn't thought of her in years. She moved out not long after Ethan disappeared. We brought the name to the detectives, but the reaction was lukewarm. Susan had been questioned in '79, cleared. Said she hadn't seen anything unusual, no mention of a nephew, no follow-up. But something didn't sit right. I called a librarian friend and asked for help tracking Susan down. After 3 days and a few dozen phone calls, she found her living in a small retirement community in Albany. We didn't call the police, not yet. Stan and I drove up ourselves. Susan looked older than I expected. Frail, sunken eyes, her voice a brittle whisper. She barely remembered us at first. But when I showed her the photograph, her hand trembled. "I don't," she began, but stopped. "That boy," I said gently. "Was he your nephew?" A long silence passed. "No," she said finally. "He wasn't my nephew. His name was Danny, yes, but he wasn't family." She exhaled, voice trembling. "He was just a kid I watched sometimes." I didn't ask too many questions. His mother was troubled. She'd disappear for days. I was paid under the table. "Did he ever come to our house with you?" I asked. "Yes," she admitted. "Once or twice. Ethan liked him." My throat closed. "Why didn't you tell the police?" Susan's eyes welled. I was scared. "Danny's mother told me not to say anything. She said if I involved the cops, I'd regret it." Stan leaned forward. "Where is she now?" Susan shook her head. "I don't know. They vanished before summer ended. The last time I saw Danny, he had a bruise on his arm and wouldn't look me in the eye. And then, nothing." We left with more questions than answers, but we had a name now, Danny, and a connection. Someone who'd been inside our home. Someone who vanished just as Ethan did. Back in the city, I called our contact at the DA's office. He agreed to re-examine the record. A week later he called. "There was a Daniel Kent," he said cautiously. "Lived with a woman named Luann Kent, known alias Luann Carmody. She had several child welfare flags, but no arrests. They were evicted from an apartment on Eldridge Street in July 1979, about 6 weeks after Ethan disappeared. And then they dropped off the map. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Ethan's eyes. That crooked smile. The way he tilted his head when he was curious. Had he followed Danny somewhere that day? Was he lured? Did something happen in that tiny apartment across the neighborhood? In early March, the DA's office reopened an informal investigation. Quietly. No headlines. No press. Just 2 seasoned detectives and a box of archived files that hadn't seen daylight in decades. They got a hit on Luann's alias. She'd applied for a driver's license in Arkansas in 1986 under the name Marlene Cross, but no Social Security activity since 1993. The trail was thin, faint, but it was something. Then came a twist none of us expected. Danny Kent, now in his late 40s, had been arrested for a minor parole violation in Oklahoma just 2 months earlier. He was out, but still on the books. We had a current address. The detectives asked if we wanted to press for questioning. Stan and I sat with that question for a long time. What if he knew something? What if he was there? And what if we were too late? March 28, 2012, 33 years after our son vanished. Stan and I sat in a beige conference room inside the Manhattan DA's office, watching a silent video feed from Oklahoma. The man on screen wore a gray sweatshirt and a confused expression. His hands trembled. His name on the record was Daniel Cross, formerly Danny Kent. The detective's voice came through the speakerphone. "Do you remember a boy named Ethan Patterson?" Danny blinked, swallowed. "Yeah," he said. "He had a swing, yellow seat." My hand flew to my mouth. He went on, voice slow, uncertain. "We weren't friends, really, not like that. But he was nice. Gave me half a popsicle once." He laughed, then winced, as if ashamed of the memory. The detective leaned forward. "Do you remember the last time you saw him?" A long pause. I think it was a Friday. It was hot. My mom was yelling a lot that day. What happened? He exhaled hard. He came to the door. I wasn't supposed to open it, but I did. We were going to go find soda bottles to return for dimes. Another pause, but then my mom said no. She screamed, pulled me inside, and Danny shook his head. I don't know. He waited for a minute, then he walked off. Did you ever see him again? No, Danny whispered. But I remember the sound, something later, like something dropped, then yelling, and then nothing. The detectives later told us Danny was not a suspect, he was a child, and from what they could gather, he had suffered years of abuse himself. His mother, Luann, aka Marlene, had vanished in the early 90s. No trace, no death certificate. Just a scattered trail of motel receipts and false names. Some believed she'd died. Others said she changed identity again and simply disappeared. The NYPD reopened a dig at a condemned building in Queens where one of Luann's last known addresses had been. Nothing was found, no remains, no evidence. Still, something had shifted. A grand jury convened in April of 2013. Pedro Hernandez, the former stockboy from the store near the bus stop, had confessed the year before, under suspicious circumstances. His confession had been buried in legal debate over his mental fitness and credibility. But Danny's account, along with new details from Susan Harrington, created a new timeline. Suddenly, the basement theory, the one everyone had dismissed, was alive again, and so were our hopes. The trial began in January of 2015. I sat in the gallery every day, clutching the photo of Ethan in his cowboy pajamas. Stan sat beside me, our hands locked. It felt like we were holding the last thread connecting us to our boy. Hernandez's lawyers argued he was mentally ill, that his confession was coerced. They showed videos of him rambling, sweating, contradicting himself. But then came the moment that stopped the courtroom cold. A detective played the final footage from Hernandez's second confession. When asked where he left Ethan's body, Hernandez pointed to a long-gone door in the building's basement. There used to be steps, he said. They went down, but they're gone now. Architectural records confirmed the detail. Those steps had been removed in 1980, information never publicly released. For me, that was it. That was truth. The jury didn't agree. After 18 days, they declared a mistrial. 11 guilty, 1 not. It was agony. The retrial began the following year. This time, there was no hesitation. In February of 2017, Pedro Hernandez was found guilty of kidnapping and murdering Ethan. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. It was a strange kind of closure. No body, no grave. Just words, papers, and tears. And a name in the court record beside our son's. Afterward, we walked outside and stood on Prince Street, right where Ethan would have waited for his school bus. The bakery was still there. So was the hydrant he used to jump over, pretending it was a hurdle. And just for a moment, I swear I heard him laugh. We never sold the house. Even now in our 70s, Stan and I live in the same creaky brownstone where Ethan once ran barefoot through the halls. His room remains untouched, not out of denial, but out of reverence. Sometimes neighborhood kids ask why we have a swing in the backyard with no children. Because a child once lived here, I say. And he mattered. They usually nod, quietly, as if they understand something deeper than words. This story doesn't end with a ribbon or a bow. It ends with an ache that never leaves, and a name whispered across decades. But it also ends with a truth reclaimed. We didn't get Ethan back, but we got our answer. And for some of us, for parents who never stop searching, that's the closest thing to peace we'll ever know.